Hey Sugar Snaps, welcome to the Textile Indie YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome in. My name is Brittany. If you're an old friend, welcome back. In today's video, I'm sharing how to do pine needle basketry on a wood round that I've drilled holes into. We're going to go over how to start your pine needle basket and then how to stitch in pine needle basketry so that you end up with beautiful sunray patterns like you would see in professional baskets. Let's get started. For this basket, you're going to need a few different tools and materials, starting out with a pair of scissors. It's pretty basic. Most crafts you need scissors. You'll need those. A tapestry needle. I'm using a number 20 tapestry needle. Some sort of twine, string, or cording. And this is polyester imitation sinew. It's braided. I have this linked in my resource page that I have linked in the description below, so you can find this down there. And then I also have these wood rounds that I've drilled holes into to create the base. And then you'll need to have your collected and dried pine needles. I have a whole video series on pine needle basketry. You can find the playlist down in this description below where I go over how to gather, clean, and prepare your pine needles, and then how to dye them if you want different colors and other things in pine needle basketry. So be sure to check that playlist out for all the setup for your pine needles. For this video, I'm going to skip over the cleaning and the preparing, and we're going to dive right into coiling the basket. To start a pine needle basket, you're going to need a gauge. So I have this bendy straw. I'm going to cut off a 1.5 inch section and use this as my gauge. So into this gauge, I'm going to take some of my pine needles here. I'm going to take the ends. I've removed the little nubbins off the ends. I'm going to tuck these into the straw until the straw sits tightly. You want it to slide with a little bit of tightness so that it doesn't just slip off. So continue adding pine needles until you get a little bit of tension when you slide this along. Now I'm going to take this and cut it so that it's my full wingspan, so fingertips to fingertips across your body, so that you have a nice long piece. Take your bundle and line the ends up so that they make a little bundle here. I want to kind of gather them together like so, and then take your end, loop it around the ends, and tie a knot. So we'll leave a little bit of a tail, come in, tie these tight. I'm just doing a square knot to tie these in place. So right over left, left over right. Make sure that knot is pretty tight. When the pine needles are damp, and I have been soaking these for a few minutes in very hot water, when they're damp, they swell up a little bit. So they're a little bit larger than they will be when they dry. So we try to pull everything tight as we're stitching so that it doesn't become loose once it's dry and the basket is complete. So once you've tied that end, we're going to load the needle with the other end, like so, and you can fold this in half a bit so you don't have quite as much length to pull through. So like that, there. And then I'm going to take my little wood round, and this is just a piece of a maple branch that I drilled holes into. I'm going to take this bundle and lay it on top, and I want to work so that I'm stitching left to right. So I'm going to send these so that they're pointed towards the right. And I'm going to line that knot up against the wood so that it kind of gets embedded in the wood there, like so. And then this tail, I'm going to pull down so that it's pointed down. And then I'm going to loop this around again and then take my needle and send it through this hole right here and up the other side like so. Pull the twine all the way through and pull tight, and then loop it over your work to the outside, and then in the next hole over from the bottom, send your needle from the bottom to the top, pull through. Or whip stitching this bundle of pine needles to the base right now. So I'm going to pull tight, and you can see as I pull tight, I'm kind of squishing the pine needles in against the wood a little bit, and that will ensure that the stitches are nice and tight. So I'll bring my twine over top once again, Send my needle through the next hole over and pull tight. And then you can space these as you go. The next hole, whip stitch this one on. We're going to do this all the way around, and my gauge is getting a little bit loose, so I'm going to come in every few stitches, let's say every 2 or 3 stitches, and you'll tuck in a new bundle of pine needles into the middle of the bundle that's already there to start to incorporate new pine needles, and that will taper the ends so that you don't end up ending all at the same time. So I'll continue doing this till I have one rotation around this piece. Here I'm doing my final stitch, and now I'm going to come in and try to tuck these in, and you can come in too if they're pretty bulky and kind of taper them down by cutting at an angle, not cutting all of them, but cutting a few away so that you can press these against your base and then situate the pine needles over top so that it sandwiches those ends in place. And I just moved my stitch over to accommodate covering those. So now we've gone all the way around a single time. I'm going to do one more stitch in this first hole just to make sure that I secure these ends in place like so. So there is our first round around this base. Now for the next round, we're going to be stitching into the pine needles, and I'm stitching so that I can build the base of the basket. So with the direction that I'm going, I have the pine needles going off towards the right, and I'm stitching left to right. I'll load this here really quick. Slide your gauge over just enough. You can load now if you need to. Don't forget to load every few stitches so that you don't run out of length here. If you end, you can tuck your pine needles back into the little gauge and keep going. But it is easier if you just load as you go. And if that happens, that's actually perfect timing, because now I can show you how to reload this. So if that happens, send all of the little tails back through your straw or whatever you're using as a gauge. Untangle your twine. And it can be a little bit tedious to get all those ends back in, but it is helpful to have them tucked in there. So you can do that, and then I'm going to reload. This will happen probably more at first because we started with a single bundle of pine needles and they all kind of ended at the same time. Once we offset them, it'll get easier to move the thing without it pulling the pine needles out on you. So now to stitch into the next space, we've done 2 stitches into this hole, that's our starting hole, embedded these tails like so. Now we're going to be stitching into our last coil of pine needles. So I'm going to send my needle in on the right side of this stitch and angle it so that it comes out on the left side. So you can see that there, my needle point came out on the left side of that stitch. Over here it went in on the right side. So if you look at that, you've kind of angled your needle but gone halfway through the bundle there. So I'm going straight up and down but at a angle to catch that stitch, and this allows the stitches to pull against the stitches and not just pull against the pine needles. This will help the spiral shape in the stitching to start to appear and all your stitches to stay together. So I'll pull that through and pull tight. Remember, keep your tension nice and secure and snug. So now you can see this stitch here that we just created is pushing against the stitch previously created, and so it's holding that stitch in place. So if we look on the other side as well, we're going to be pulling towards the right, which is going to push this stitch against the previous stitch, and since we came out on the left, it has a stitch to pull up against. So our next stitch again is going to go in on the right side of that previous stitch, out on the left side, like so, and we want to go straight through the pine needle bundle. So we're catching about half the bundle in our stitch, and then I'll pull this through. Oops. And pull tight. Loop it around. Slide down. I'm going to fill with a few more pine needles here. Again, right side of the stitch. Come out on the left side of the stitch. Push through. Bring your twine around, loop over. We're going to do this one time around, and then we'll need to put a stitch in between previous stitches to fill in this space so that the stitches are only ever about 1/4 inch apart. You want them spaced about 1/4 inch apart because that will ensure that the basket stays nice and sturdy, especially with this size basket. You can go do stitches more often if you want, but structurally it's not really necessary. And I'm going to tuck the ends of these pine needles here into the work. I'm trying to kind of hide them so that they don't poke out as much. So if they're in the sides, they're going to get tucked against other pine needles and they'll kind of get hidden. Okay, so I've gone around a second time, and it might be a little bit hard to see because my stitches are coiling really nicely, but this coil right here is my second time around. Here it is from the side and the top. So now what I need to do is do a stitch in between each previous stitch and then also in the current stitches. But I'm going to pause here, take my twine off my needle, and take this end, load it into my needle, and I'm going to weave it into the base a little bit so that it stays out of my way. So I'm going to take it and tuck it in under these stitches in this direction, and I'm going the opposite way of my stitching. So I'm stitching left to right, I'm tucking the tail right to left, like so, and then I can trim this end right there. So that's tucked in to the bottom, and now it's out of the way. Okay, I'm going to load my needle back up like so, and then go in, and my first stitch here for my third time around is going to go in between this stitch and this stitch. So right halfway through this pine needle coil, I'm going to go straight through like this, try not to split the pine needle there, and pull all the way through, curve it and pull tight. On these stitches, don't pull so tight or as tight as you would otherwise, because you are just pulling against pine needles. It can be easy to break them. So just pull tight enough to secure it and keep it tight, but don't over exaggerate the tightness. So then on your next stitch, you're going to go right to left halfway through the pine needle bundle like we did before, pull through, and this stitch, because it has the string to pull against, you can pull pretty tight. Again, it's just enough to kind of create a little indentation into the pine needles to ensure that when they shrink, you have twined tight enough or coiled tight enough. So then again, in between these two stitches, I'm going to go halfway through, do a stitch in between, kind of press down and pull tight on that stitch, and then loop it around, and then right to left on this stitch, pull through, and I can pull a little bit tighter on this guy. Loop around. I'm going to take a pause and load. So I think that was about 2 or 3 stitches before I needed to reload. I'll slide this up to catch those, and then a next stitch is in between. Like so. And when you come up on the side of the twine, try not to split the twine. Try to make sure that you're right on the side of it. That way when you pull tight, you're not shredding anything that's there. Another note on the stitches in between your previous stitches, like this stitch right here is in between previous stitches. This generally only happens on the round shaped baskets and the ends of oval shaped baskets. So if you are working with an oval base, the sides, the stitches are going to sit closer together, but the ends are going to be further apart on an oval basket. With a round basket, you'll get to a point where you need to do a stitch in between every previous stitch. Oval baskets, just on the ends. Once you've gone around and done a stitch in between each of the previous stitches, so here's my previous stitches, here's the stitch in between, previous stitches, stitch in between. This first round, it's going to look a little bit messy as we finish that round up, but then you can come in and space your stitches out a little bit so that they're a little more evenly spaced. And when we do the next round, we're going to be stitching into each of those stitches. So you'll re-establish them as stitches and it'll start to clean things up a bit. So again, go back in right to left of that previous stitch like that. And now every stitch that you did previously, you're going to put in a stitch. And we're going straight through the coil, like so. Here you're building the flat part or the base of a basket. So when we are stitching, we're going straight through the pine needle coils. And that dictates that the coil sits right alongside the previous coil. So it's coiling around in a manner that is flat against your surface. If you want to start raising the walls of your basket, you're going to change the angle of your needle and where you place the stitches. So I'll show you that. I'm going to load my thread because I'm coming to the end of this length. I'll show you how to attach a new length. When I do pine needle basketry, I typically tie on a new length of twine so that I can keep working. Some basket weavers do it differently. This is just the method that I have found to work the most efficiently for me and to hold my work together well. It also works well with this twine. So if you're working with something like raffia or some other material, there may be a better way to do this. But with this waxed twine that I'm using, it's polyester and pretty slippery. So I like to do a square knot with an overhand knot over top to ensure that it stays put. So I'll show you that just in a minute. Okay, so I've come around. I'm going to set this against my surface and bring my tail like so. I'm going to bring this so that it crisscrosses like that. And then from my twine, do another wingspan, so fingertip to fingertip across your body, so that you end up with about 5 feet of twine. Cut that. And then I'm going to take one end and rotate this around so that this is pointing off towards the right. I'm going to take my new end, lay it on top. So I have right piece going over the left piece, which is this one. I'm going to loop this piece that's on the right underneath, and then left over right, so the piece that's on the left is going to go over the one on the right through like so, and then position your knot so that the knot ends up really close to the basket. So I'm going to tighten that in there, so that it sits right there, like so. That way, when I go to pull tight, the knot is going to sit on the side of the coil, nice and snug. So I'm going to now take these two ends, the tails, 2 bunny ears, loop them around my left pointer finger so that I have a loop on my finger like this, and then take these ends, cross over, and tuck them into, I can pull the loop away, tuck them into this loop. So cross that over, pull the ends through the loop, And then now you're going to have another knot. That knot, slide it so that it sits right on top of your previous knot, or as close to it as possible. So pull that tight, and there is my knot on top of my knot, like that. And now if I pull nice and snug, when I load my needle with this twine and I do my next stitch, these ends should end up right on the side, right in there like that. So I'll do my next stitch. And that knot ends up in the side of the coil, or on the side of the coil, so that when I come back around, it'll get sandwiched between two coils. I'm going to do one more stitch like this. And then take my needle off this twine and grab one of these tails, or you can actually grab both of the tails if they'll fit in your needle. Send both tails through the eye of your needle, like so, and then send these tails through the loops back towards the left. So again, opposite of the direction that we are stitching. And I'm going to go under 3 or 4 stitches here, right in the side, so that these also get embedded into the side of the coils. And then once I've gone over 4, I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail here sticking out. Cut that so that it sits like that. And now these will get embedded into the coil, and that will hold the knot in place. Now I'll reload my twine and continue to stitch. I'm going to show you how to start to build the walls, because the needle placement is a little bit different. But let me get back around to where I started at this point, and then I'll show you that. If you're going around your basket and you're wondering, how many rows have I done? Or you need to know where your starting point is, you'll find that hole that we did 2 stitches in, and that is your starting point. So one of the reasons we do 2 stitches per that starting hole is so that it's easy to identify. The other reason was to make sure that we secured those ends in place so that they get tucked in. And you can see mine here have been embedded into the structure of the basket, so they're not popping out on either side of that base, which is a really nice way to make sure that those ends stay secure. So that is the point, or that is your starting point, which means that it's also your ending point. So each time you go around, that is going to be where you start and then go around until you meet that point again, and that is one more round. So if you count your stitches here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've just started a 5th round here. So I've got 4 layers of coils going on the sides here. Now on my 5th round, so that I can show you how to start to weave the walls upward, I'm going to shift to the in-between row. So there's 3 placements for your needle. You have the straight through the coil from the side, like we've been doing for the base, and now you're going to have the in-between, and this is just a single setup row. So now you're going to hold your base so that it is sitting on its side, and you're going to take your needle and tuck it into the side of the coil. So instead of going bottom to top like we have been doing straight through like this, you're going to move this coil out of the way and go into the side of the coil from the right, again, just like we've been doing, but come in to the side here. So the needle is going to go in right here and then out to the inside of the coil. So instead of coming up in the middle, I'm going to the inside of that coil. And if you look at it from the side, my needle is still angled towards the left, but my needle placement is side to inside of the coil instead of bottom to top. So I'll pull this through, and what that positioning does is pulls the stitches so that the coil sits now to the side and angles up on top of what was previously there. So you can see it starts to shift this coil up the side. So again, if you go into the side of the coil on the right side and out of the coil on the left side, but you move it so that it's kind of coming out almost between those two coils. So I have this coil right here and the one right next to it. I want to push that needle out almost between those two like this. Pull that through, pull tight, and that's going to pull the coil up the side so that it starts to sit just above that last coil. So this is our setup row. We only do this placement of stitches for one row, unless you are going to be building your basket out and you want to kind of bring the walls out like this so that this continues to curve outwards to the side. Then you would do that for all of your rows. If you want straight walls, we're going to do this as your initial setup row, and then I'll show you this stitch placement for straight walls. Now I've gone all the way around here. You can see the little bit of the lip coming off the edge of my basket. So all the way around, I've lipped this up. I'm back to that starting point, and now I'm going to show you how to create the walls. So if you want straight walls, you're going to use the third needle positioning to start to angle the walls straight up and down. So now we're going to do basically the same thing as we did on the bottom, but instead of going top to bottom in this manner like we did before, we're going to go side to side this direction. So that previous stitch, again, go in on the right side, position your needle in the center of the coil or that round from the side, and then come out on the left from the center, the side there. So side to side, like so. Straight through, pull tight, like so, and now these coils will sit right on top of each other like that. So then we'll loop this around again, and I'll go into the side of the previous coil right here, and out on the side to the left of that previous stitch right there. Make sure to tuck your tails in, or the ends of the pine needles in as you get to them, like so. So then that coil sits right on top of the previous coil. So you have this starter row, and then this next row sits right on top of that. So you end up with a bit of an edge like that. So you can keep building the walls straight up. You can alternate between side to side and that setup row, or angling out row, kind of playing around with the different angling of your needle and the way you put your stitches in to dictate the shape of your basket. Now that we have a number of rows in place, you can see that spiral shape where the stitches kind of connect and create a sunburst effect in the bottom where they spiral and they stay connected. You're starting to see that form on the outside as well as on the inside of the basket. So that placement of stitching where you put the needle in on the right side of the stitch and then come out on the left side of the stitch, that is how you get that spiraling to happen, as long as your pine needles are coming from left and the ends are pointed towards the right. I have a lot of work to do on my little basket before it is complete, but that is the basic pine needle basketry stitch and how to place your stitches so that you get those sunray effects with your stitches, as well as where to place your stitches so that you end up building a base, a wall, and be able to angle out the walls if you want. So manipulating the needle placement is how you change the structure or shape of the basket. Where you place the needle in relation to the previous row's stitch is how you get the sunray effect and make sure that your stitches stay nice and close together. Be sure to check the description below for the playlist on pine needle basketry that I have here on my YouTube channel, as well as the corresponding page on my website. I have other resources there and a full resource guide on all the tools and materials for pine needle basketry. So check the description for that, and until next week, happy making. I'll see you later. Bye.